Hello, everybody. Good morning and happy Friday the 13th. If you're catching this live or on the day we're originally broadcasting it, it will also be published on the Asymmetric Habits podcast in just a few days next week. Those have been coming out on Wednesday mornings. But today's topic is on letting go of definitions of success. And this is something that comes up a lot in both Jonathan and I's course of work, which is why he, as the awesome, amazing professional licensed counselor he is, and myself, as a friendly neighborhood strength coach that I am, wanted to bring this into play for today's Asymmetric Habits episode. A lot of people in general, struggle with what they think success will be, how they want to define it, and then as they basically reach or even surpass outcomes, if it's not necessarily attuned to what they thought it was going to be, then that creates much more of a struggle internally for them than they really deserve. To be honest, like rather than grasp the good, it's really easy to focus on nitpicking or other details, which is why we thought this would be a good one, a great topic for people. So, JP, what were you thinking, buddy?
Of course, I see this a lot because I work with a lot of anxious individuals, and the more people are anxious, especially about success, the more they tend to tighten their definition to a point where it becomes way more difficult to meet, which by itself is not always a problem. But what happens to a lot of people is they tighten it down to a place where, as an example, here's one that I see with my socially anxious people a great deal, is they'll come up with the idea that success must involve not only the ability to functionally talk to other people, which probably it does, but the ability to masterfully and smoothly talk to other people and be able to move from socially anxious to being like a master presenter, and be able to do like huge auditorium speaking with no anxiety whatsoever. And if you notice that becomes a very tight definition, because even your very excellent public speakers have a tendency to have some level of anxiety, and so it's a section of their idea of success that is so tight that it's basically unmeetable. And even for the ones that are meetable, a lot of people will end up accidentally missing, that they've arrived at something that is very close to what they wanted for success. Uh, they just didn't notice because they were really too busy with their ultra tight definition. So yeah, I kind of really thought about what are the things people are chasing, and kind of today, we can talk about what the real things people end up chasing are. And if people can become more in tune with that, oftentimes they'll wake up and realize, oh, I'm actually achieving the thing that deep down I wanted anyway. I just accidentally put the wrong cover on it, and didn't realize that I was still getting the thing that I really wanted at heart.
Yeah, as this talk goes on, I'm really curious to hear what your strategies are going to be to help people work with this because I mean, yeah, like when we talk about expectations, I feel like it's so hard. Um, it's so hard to get ourselves to change to be open minded about changing that or looking beyond what we're looking like that initial thing we're looking for. But then, especially in helping others, it's got to be even harder with that because this is one of those situations that while I try to not necessarily do this, it instantly brings to mind the like success is a journey, not the destination type of saying. It's which for as much as we've heard that, I mean, there's a lot of like good stuff and truth in that. But being able to do that is, I mean, I say it's much harder. And
Yeah, it's easy to quote the phrase, but then actually making it connect emotionally is way different oftentimes.
Exactly. Because so one place that I see this a lot, with as a strength coach with so many athletes is, for example, champions. Well, either championships or playing in college. Like those are two very common goals for like a high school crowd or even a middle schooler. And again, like you can do everything right, and those two things may still not happen. It's just like there's a lot of good teams and good athletes at play with championship stuff. So just a few unfortunate plays, unlucky bounces, can stop an otherwise perfect season. And same thing when it comes to playing college. I mean, ultimately, that's other people's decision, and you never know. It's like if you really want to play college basketball, but you stop growing at 5'6", like that makes things harder. um, and so, like, there's so many good benefits that can come from those years playing sports. From the fitness that you do, like committing to hard work. Like, I don't want to go into the overall benefits of, say, competitive sports, but all of that can be overlooked pretty easily if your only definition of success was get championship rings, get college scholarship. And high school wins and those two things don't happen. I mean, it can be pretty hard it might take a long time, if ever, for you to realize the things that you got in that time because you're so focused on what you didn't get.
Well, yeah, and that's honestly the story of the person anxious of success is they get focused on what they don't have and miss out on the fact that they actually landed pretty darn close to it. They have an awful
Mm-hmm.
lot, which in a way is its own tragedy. Or maybe there's certain stuff that's closed off to people, like you mentioned. You want to play this particular sport, but you don't have the right body for it, and you can't beat genetics, at least not yet. Uh, but figuring out how to pivot to get something similar to the thing you want. So if let's kind of set it up, because when I was thinking about this, I kind of you know was cataloging what is it people look for when they're defining success. And there's probably a lot more elegant ways to put it, but as I thought about it, I kind of figured out that there's basically four things. If you ask people's vision of being successful, there's four things they're chasing. Usually they're chasing one big one, and they might be chasing a couple of the other small ones, but usually there's one big one. And so if somebody's chasing success, they're chasing one of four things. They're either chasing security, oftentimes monetary security, like I grew up poor and I want to not have to scrape money together to be able to buy groceries. I want to be able to just swipe my credit card, buy groceries, and go home. Different types of security. I want to be able to have a house. I want to be able to, like, just afford my car and not have to stress over it. Most of the time it's monetary security, but sometimes it can be other things. But 99% of the time it's going to be monetary security if people are looking at security as their big thing. And you can sometimes tell, because a lot of people who, if they define their success by the amount of dollars in the bank account, there's an element of security probably to that. So security is one. One of the other ones is very obvious: accolades. Some people just love applause, and applause is basically their definition of success. How many followers do I have on Instagram? How many people cheer for me at the stadium? How many people recognize me as being somebody? Uh, so accolades is easily one of the places people go to for success. Expertise, internally feeling like they are important in some way, which can be as simple as expertise as a parent. I know that I am impactful in the life of my child, and therefore I am successful. Or it can be in the field. I've created this amazing gym for people to come to. I've created a great counseling practice. Somehow expertise will play into a lot of people's success. And then the toughest one, but still very much oriented to a lot of people, is success through the idea of change. How did I contribute? How did I change something? How did I change something in society? Something about the way people view things. This is where you see people like write books or do other things, because they're either trying to showcase their expertise, or they're trying to get accolades, or they're trying to produce change, and the change itself is the success measure. So those seem to be, to my eye, the four things people end up chasing. But then the set dressing comes, and whatever it is, like if they're chasing accolades, it becomes less about knowing that that's the heart of it, and more about, I must win the championship or else I'm a loser and I suck and I'm no good.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so so that being such a difficult part of it. And so actually, why do you think people tend so often to focus on the exact variables that we are the ones that we cannot control?
You know, that's probably a question for wiser folks than me, but I'll take a crack at it. Human
Of all
beings
the things.
love to, yeah, human beings love to complicate things. Like we absolutely will take something simple and make it absurdly complicated, given any opportunity to do so. And I suspect a good deal of it comes from that. Instead of just being okay with what we have, we come up with, but it could be better and it could be this. And that's been an okay thing because it's really advanced us in many ways. But that blade cuts both directions and it can
Mhm.
become poisonous too.
Yeah. It is just crazy when you think about how much stuff has that in common um, with the human experience. So, so I like the way you set that up with the, you mentioned the security, the accolades, like I said, the change, and what was the fourth one?
Expertise.
Expertise. Yeah, because I feel like I see so many of that. Is there one or the other that you feel like has a bigger chance of changing easily for somebody, like somebody to deal with on an easier basis?
That's really so individual because it really depends on how locked in they are to the surface level image. Because some people I can be like, we'd be in the counseling room. I can just be like, dude, you're chasing security. You're already secure. You don't need another 50 million in the bank. You've already
Mhm.
got two. What would you buy with the other 48? And they're like, oh, yeah, you're right. That's dumb. And they can
Yeah.
shift their mindset instantly without a lot of
Mm.
effort. But then there's some people who are so locked into it that they really have to do hard work psychologically to make the shift. So honestly, I don't know that any of them are easier than the other. The only one I would kind of put out there as the most difficult one to actually achieve is the change part. Because I mean, shifting a society, if you have the idea of I want to contribute by making a
Mhm.
societal change, that's just mathematically more difficult than getting enough money to be financially secure.
Right.
But
Right.
past that is very individual.
Yeah. So you mentioned, creating the psychological shift. So that is definitely where I want to go with this. Is what are strategies that we can use to actually either for ourselves or for other people to help navigate through this. Like I said, like sometimes it's just that something's not happening, but sometimes, like we've been saying, something really good does happen, and it's just hard for ourselves or for the other person to see the good for what they're focused on. So what are the psychological tools we can do to actually improve this?
So step one, try and figure out what's the actual thing you're chasing, because and be honest about that, because a lot of people really feel negatively toward themselves when they realize they're chasing accolades. It's okay to love applause like that. There's nothing bad about that. You can chase it in a poisonous way, but if that's the thing that motivates you and makes you happy. But a lot of people, as soon as they realize they're chasing accolades, they start feeling negatively about themselves.
Mhm.
They think they're stupid or that they're somehow bad or egotistical. But step one would be just figure out what's the actual thing you're chasing, and really try and figure out the primary one, because most of the things we have in our head as success look like all four, but we're usually chasing one primarily. So the awareness is the hardest part, and sadly, there's no cool psychology trick for like developing awareness. It's just
Mhm.
the only thing you can do is just try and be in touch with yourself and notice some of your behaviors. Because if I see somebody who is very money oriented and very like anxious about spending an extra 50 cents on their groceries or something, even though they've got money, I can maybe make a guess that they're very security oriented as far as like being successful goes. So there's some ways to make educated guesses about yourself. If you are a person who just can't stop taking classes to expand your knowledge, not a bad chance that your idea of success somehow centers around expertise.
Mhm.
So there's behavioral markers to look at within yourself that can help increase your awareness. But even so, a lot of it's just developing an internal sense of what is the thing I'm chasing here.
This is off the top of my head, so I'm gonna apologize in advance if my source is slightly off. But I think it was Simon Sinek, who's an author in like the business mindset space.
And
Um,
well worth listening to and reading for sure.
yes, and I think it might be in Start with Why or that book, but in something, and I'm pretty sure it's Sinek. He has an exercise where it's in essence asking yourself why for 7 layers. Now,
That sounds right.
I don't know how he came up with, I don't know where that came from exactly is like that number, but like I said, it was, yeah, asking yourself when finding out why you're doing something or why you want it. Like you're saying, you have to be honest with it, but answering the question, but then like a 6 year old on a 6 year old just on a trip at home, keep asking why when you give the answer, but then keep being honest about it. And basically what that does, I mean, yeah, like the strategy behind it is great because like we tend to even to ourselves give very basic common answers for why we want stuff or at least superficial ones. And so if we keep making ourselves answer why we want something or to achieve something or to have something whatever, and we basically are like stripping away those layers each time till by like basically by the seventh answer you find out that real reason.
Yeah.
And yeah, like you're saying, it could be like, okay, like, why do you feel like you really need to have, like you're saying, like $1 million in the bank, like in the bank by the time you're 50 or something? It's like, okay, I feel like at that point in time I made it. Well, why? Do you feel like at that point? Well, like at that point, hopefully like my family, we won't have to struggle as much when it comes to costs and mortgage and stuff like that. Oh, well, why is that important to you? And you start working down, and like the financial one, like you're saying, could come would that would be a fairly traditional way to get down to a security, but you could find out why the security part is even important to you. Like I said, maybe you find out other things like it is because you were not financially secure as a child or with your background, or maybe you were, but you had some huge like hit, got hit by like housing crisis or recession. You know how quickly it can disappear, so you're super focused on making sure
Mhm.
that it can't happen again, type of stuff. Like a lot of stuff becomes apparent even to yourself that you may not have like realized consciously if you really do dig deep into that why. Um,
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
that's a good point. Matter of fact, let me expand on that for just a second, because you started to slightly describe it, and I'll take it a little further. Let's imagine the person who gets oriented to security doesn't realize that's what they're oriented to, and they maybe have become as secure as it's reasonable to become, but they still spend too much time on it. So one way is to amass more stacks of money, which is a very common way. But another way will be to imagine the next terrible way that all of the stuff can disappear and try and insure against that. Which some stuff makes sense because we've had big financial crashes and stuff, so it makes sense to insure against that. But when you catch somebody then trying to patch holes that are extremely unlikely to happen, it almost becomes like trying to make the car more secure. Well, okay, you put seat belts and airbags in it, and that's all good, and you wear them and use the safety features. But as soon as you catch somebody trying to put plates of armor over the doors
That's
and like
exactly what I
like
was
do some weird stuff, then it's like, wow, okay, we've gone overboard. We need to help you orient to the fact you're actually about as secure as you're going to be able to come, because you're not going to encounter a tank rolling down the street in your car. But saying that example makes it kind of funny, but it's so easy to not notice it when you're oriented towards success, because our society says, "Oh yes, well just do everything you can to be successful," which is not bad advice. It can just go too far. You get the same thing with athletes who end up overtraining. You
yeah.
know, that like how many times have we bitched about the fact that athletes have trouble taking rest days because they have trouble imagining that maybe they're just ready for the stupid game.
Yeah, I deal with that every week too. Every week.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like one of the other places that we find this, and like speaking of athletes, but is like involving anybody, is like with fitness, like in just people who start working out, or even if it's not working out, but they do something to try to improve their health, whether it is working out, new exercise regimen, whether it's eating better, you name it. And like we had an episode like 2 years ago about the myth of body weight as a measure of fitness,
Was that
and
2 years ago? Jeez.
it might not have been, but I just threw that number out there since we were doing these then. Um, but I mean, heck, that could be in the running for one of the top ways that people measure success. Is I want to get fitter, thus I must lose weight,
Yeah.
or must be this weight. And so many people have that notion. And notice is like most people, if they have not actually been fit before, uh, do not realize what being fit will actually feel like. Like it's not an atmosphere that they've lived in before, and they also don't notice that things don't happen linearly like they think so. Like it's not going to be, oh, you're going to lose 2 pounds a week until you've lost 30, or 2 pounds a month till you've lost 30 pounds or something. Like it's not going to work that way. Like you're going to have months where you lose more. You're going to have plateaus. You might actually even gain a little bit again. The body's never linear when it comes to stuff like that. Um, and one thing that professionals do well is they know that they help you craft a plan that will help you get near that end result that you want, but they'll hopefully also like may help you realize that it's like when the ups and downs are likely to happen, or those like why their changes are occurring. But anyway, for example, with fitness, one of the most unexpected things that happens from my experience is people don't lose the weight that they're trying to lose like in their mind, but they nevertheless realize that they feel a lot better. Like it's like
Hmm.
they're more energetic. They realize that feeling stronger feels good. They're not struggling as much with things. They start finding benefits in other parts of their life, whether it's just like daily tasks or not being tired at work, stuff like that. And what's funny is, like I said, like, well, luckily, most people that I come across who at least they get far enough to reap those benefits, they realize that, and that tends to be a pretty successful pivot, like natural pivot. Like most people realize that as a good thing. From my experience, and start taking that as a good thing. But I have nevertheless encountered people who, even if everything else went right, if they didn't get that way, if they didn't hit that weight target that they wanted, they consider it all a failure. And
Right. And let's relate that to the orientations of success. Because let's put two people right next to each other that started at the same weight, that ended at the same weight. They lost some amount of weight, but they have two different success orientations, accolades and expertise. So the person who loses the weight but has an accolades orientation, we might reliably guess that they would end up feeling a little better because number one, oftentimes if people know they're trying to lose weight and they do, they'll get some version of applause. Hey man, I see you're looking good. See is that things are going better. Whatever the applause statements may be. And as they're feeling better, uh, people who feel better are just more vital, and they bring up more aliveness to the people around them, which reacts positively with the people around them. So they create a feedback loop. So the person with the accolades orientation might more easily feel good. The person with the expertise orientation, in this specific example, they lose the same amount of weight. But how easy would it be for them to feel bad because they have accidentally connected, oh, I must get to this type of weight, and because I didn't, I must be what? Stupid, lazy. I must in some way be deficient because I was not expert enough to get to the place I wanted to get to. Uh, and so this is why it's good to figure out like what is your success orientation, because if you feel bad, but then realize, well, okay, something about expertise feels wrong here. It becomes then much more easy to reorient. Like, well, okay, I lost 78 pounds out of my target 85. That's still
Mhm.
pretty expert at changing my fitness. And it gives them opportunities for reframes, but if they don't know what they're chasing, it becomes harder to then properly reframe everything.
Mhm. I feel like we can't get through this topic without bringing in one of our favorites, social media, because it like
Least favorites is what you mean.
because that just made me think about it is how this is one of those areas where social media, well, like every area can either really help or also really hurt at the same. Can do either one. I mean, if you're only like we've rehashed 1,000 plus times. If you're only focusing on what other people post, that's probably going to hurt things because it just gives you unrealistic views of what's happening. But one good place I feel like where some people do this is in documenting journeys. When people are making changes, especially like fitness is a big one. But there's still others. Like you see some people trying to document, like investment goals or strategies they've never done or business growth. Um, this is probably well, it depends. Like for example, you see a lot of YouTube stuff would be business oriented. Fitness stuff is definitely kind of more of like the Instagram reels, all that stuff. It seems, but nevertheless, you see documentate like again people documenting journeys on this type of thing, and that can really help in spreading awareness, inspiring people to maybe do the same thing, kind of increase people's relationship like to you or your brand or feel connected to you. Like that can help. So there's a lot of positives that can happen, but again, the downs, like we said, it cuts both ways. If you are a documenter and you fall short of what you have decided your goal is, or maybe even publicly stated that your goal is,
Mm.
that can like how you deal with that could be enormous. Not just for your own, like I mean, for your own sanity first and foremost, but also how you deal with that. With like the whatever relationship you have cultivated with others. Um,
Well, yeah, that's such a wonderful point because yeah, it really speaks to what happens to a lot of people. Because I hadn't thought of that example, but that's a good example. Where if somebody says, "Hey, here is my goal," and they have an accolades orientation, and then they fall short of the goal, even if they don't receive negative criticism, it's very easy for them to imagine that like they're not going to get the applause that they wanted and then feel way worse. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
yeah, I mean that's one of those places where I feel like awareness, honesty. Like I said, it's really easy to say something out in public as like, well, it might not be. It could be easy. Let's just say to say like I'm going to do this, and then when you realize you're not moving towards it, you just kind of decide to let it be quiet. You're just like, I'm just not going to bring this up again. It's like that.
Hmm.
Which if that's how you want to deal with it, like I said, that's fine as long as you're basically going to be like okay with that. Um, and yeah, and what's crazy though, this is one of those things where when you fall short on what you feel like what you were trying to get to, if you have decided to make it a public journey, whether through social media to thousands of people or just like, your family members at the table, whatever it is, if you have decided to make it public and you fall short, being honest about the falling short part may actually continue to help that because that's one of those places where people tend to relate to that as well because we all fall short at something, and especially if they have been kind of like looking up to you up until that, if they've been just like invested or interested in your journey, hearing that you didn't make it all the way but then actually talking about it or bringing it up can be huge in helping those people then be able to do the same thing
Well,
and real.
let me notice that there's a good because I was about to bring us into like how do you work on this past awareness? And this is a perfect opportunity,
Mhm.
because let's take somebody with the expertise orientation. They're going to have a hard time saying, "Oh yes, I did not meet my goal," because they look inexpert, right? And,
Mhm.
and so that offends their expertise orientation for success. One of the ways that this can become powerful and useful for people is figuring out, how can I still meet my measure of success even though I might miss the precise target I was aiming for. So if we take somebody who like sets a goal, they miss it, it feels bad, it tastes bad to admit any level of inexpertise because they're that orientation. One of the things that they can do is there's two really. They can either refocus and figure out, like, okay, are there other areas where I can feel comfortable feeling successful because I am actually expert in those areas. Take the business owner for example. You can be a wonderful technician of like whatever thing you do, but not a very good business owner.
Mhm.
A lot of people with the expertise orientation can like suck at the business side, but still feel okay because they're an amazing electrician or carpenter or whatever. And so they can reorient and refocus to that and still feel okay. But the other one, possibly the more powerful one, is being able to notice the thing you're presently expert in or becoming expert in, which is, in this case, how do I bounce back from missing goals? Because I mean, after you've missed 50 of them, you're starting
Oh
to
yeah.
become kind of an expert at like figuring out how to navigate that. Uh, and I mean, you see entrepreneurs all the time, you see athletes all the time having to come back from whatever injuries, missed goals, lost businesses. I mean, pick almost anything, and people have bounced back from it publicly. But being able to orient, like, okay, I'm also gaining experience and becoming expert in this. So for the person with the expertise orientation, there's oftentimes the opportunity to try and reframe what they're going through in a positive but also honest way. Like lying to yourself is bad, but reframing in an honest way is actually a very powerful tool.
Mhm. I feel like so often, like we just talked about being able to connect that honesty with other people. This is also in a lot of ways, I feel like how people get inspired by creations or legacies, anything like that, like movies that move us. A lot of times, it's a lot of times when you think about it, it's because they're connecting these types of issues and going through that in their hero's journey, or books, or like I got my handful of life stories from people who have been dead from 10 years to 2000 years. But a lot of those pieces, it's because, like, okay, it's not that they just lived up to this like enormous life, but all the things that they dealt with to lead to that. It's like, okay, where are these things inspiring, or where can we learn from these types of things? um so all these things like that we don't really think about necessarily why we connect to it. I think a lot of it has to do with how they help us navigate, like I said, from where we are now to what success eventually is, or just that happiness point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So two specific ones that I definitely want to make sure we go into. I know one situation is, okay, how about specific definitions of success for others? You and I, outside of this broadcast so far, talked about this being a big one for parents,
Mm.
dealing with their kids. And again, this can be everything from the parent who has huge hopes for their kids' athletic prowess, or like the parents who instead feel like if their son is going to be the doctor and going to the top schools, like the and everything in between and outside of that, like there's endless variations of this. But yeah, so for parents, or just in general for people like who feel like they know what success should be like for X other person, how can they instead deal with that better to let the other person, I mean, really just live their life and be successful in their way, and change that to a more supportive and possibly helpful manner?
Yeah. Okay. So this one's easy for me because I've only ever seen this play out one way. Although because of the work I do, that I could just be getting a skewed sample because of who comes in the door. But when it comes to a parent having an idea of success and having a specific success orientation, I can't think of a single example that's not security orientation. So
Hmm.
no matter what, and here's a common one. Here's probably the most common one I've dealt with in the last 5 years. No matter what else we're talking about, at some point grades come up. Like my kid isn't getting the grades I want them to get. And sometimes it's legitimate F's. And sometimes it's A's and B's, and I think my child should have all A's. Uh, and then if I sit with them long enough, always we come up with, well, if they have better grades, they're more likely to get better jobs and they're more likely to be more secure. So always when I deal with this with parents, it seems to be security orientation. And if I do anything, I'm basically helping them orient to, look, what your child is doing is still secure, because you know 4.0s versus 3.75s don't significantly change opportunities. They rule out one or two, but past that, they don't significantly change the math of security. Even kids who just ditch out of school have opportunities for security. This is not, by the way, an advertisement to get out of school, but there are opportunities for security, and helping parents orient to what are the opportunities your child still has for security. That's oftentimes the thing. Now, and sometimes we do have to do legitimate interventions because, like, child is doing something actually unsafe, like drugs or something. But anytime a parent gets way overdone on their focus on a child's normal behavior, and age appropriate behavior, it's always security orientation. Always, always, always. If you have an example of something that's not security orientation, I'd love to hear it, because
I
it
do.
would be a neat story. Oh, cool! Because like
Yeah.
I have never yet seen
And it's I think this is really cool example of the differences in what you come across on a normal basis and what I come across on a normal basis. I mean, luckily, I mean, I don't come across this, like, say, in front of my desk every day or anything,
it.
but
Sure.
parents who are focused on the accolades their kids get. There's a lot of that in the sporting world, and it's almost that, like, I see this in a couple different ways. One is the parent living vicariously through their child. So they're like, if the kid is a better athlete, for example, than the parent is, the parent's the one that's like super pushing them, wanting to get like all of that. Um, and on the flip side, sometimes the parent might have been the better athlete than the child was. And so they're trying to push that child into doing more, or maybe they don't even like the sport, that of those things, but the parent is not cool with letting go with letting go of that and wants them to keep trying it and pushing it. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, the parent seeking accolades, it's weird though, because I don't know, probably can't even necessarily separate it, at least all the time, if the parent is looking for accolades for the child or because of the child. But I feel like the accolades is another big one.
There's definitely now that you say that, that's a good point. You can tell that I didn't think through all of my examples, because yes, there are definitely parents who accidentally orient to getting accolades through their child, which is not a good idea for the child's benefit. So yes, that absolutely does happen. The other example I would suggest might still have a good opportunity to be security, because one of the things I've heard sometimes is, well, I want my child to do the sport I did because it taught me so much about life, and therefore they will be prepared more
No.
for life, which of course is back to security orientation.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like
But
there's
the other one you said, yeah,
overlap.
you're absolutely right. People can't seek accolades through their children. I don't know why I didn't think of that when you
Yeah.
until you said it.
Um, I feel like the stereotype of the tiger mom, quote unquote. So much of that, like, it's like, oh, you got to be amazing at this instrument, you got to have the straight A's, all this stuff, and it's like I feel like that's a great example of a combination one. So like security because you're great at all the things, and then the accolades because your kid is so awesome, so you're an awesome parent, all that stuff. Well, I know we're getting short on time, but there's one more that I really wanted to ask you.
Yeah, I know you had one more.
Yeah, and this was going to be a curveball, probably. It's so kind of reestablishing a definition of success or reorienting one when success involved identity and that identity is over. So yeah, so I said like my world, I see this the most with athletes again, because that's where I see that athletes' careers eventually come to an end. Some of them parlay that into amazing stuff afterwards, and some of them tank and just can't figure out how to navigate that afterwards. And
Yep, and I would even know where to bet my money on which one's which if I get to know their success orientation. The ones who do well are probably focused on any of the orientations besides accolades.
mm,
The ones who don't do well, I would suspect that their orientation is an accolades orientation.
that makes total
Because
sense.
let's tell a story and see how common this story is. Because you'll actually know this story way more than I will. Let's imagine a coach who or an athlete who then stops being an athlete because it's you just can't do it anymore, and then they go be a coach, uh, and then and let's make it one I'm familiar with. Let's make it a sport I'm familiar with, MMA. A lot of fighters then turn coach in some way, whether they had a big career or not. How many coaches do you ever see throw their fighter into stuff that they're not ready for because, oh, but this is a bigger opportunity, you'll get more dot dot dot, but really it's about like inside, it's never said out loud, people will see me as a better coach if you fight this way bigger, more skilled opponent. You see that a lot in that sport. I assume you see similar things in other sports, although I'd have trouble telling the story of how it happens. But if somebody has an expertise orientation, well, I'm good at football, I then become a coach, and now I'm bringing my expertise in a different way, but it's still working for me. That person probably does reasonably well. Uh, or if there's security orientation, oh, I made millions as a basketball player. Now I invest in these businesses and make millions more, and now I have more money, more stacks. Like it goes well. So that would be my suspicion. I'd have to think more on your curveball to make sure. So everybody be aware that this is a rough draft answer, but I think it's probably close if even if I've missed a few things.
No, that makes a ton of sense about being just not accolade driven. That really does. Um,
Which is not, by the way, a dig on people who are accolades driven. Just in that scenario, you have to be more careful how you
right,
reorient to so
right.
you can still be successful.
Yeah, and like I mean, if anything, just yeah, repivot. I mean, not repivot, but retarget a different type of accolade.
Yeah.
Because thinking about like I remember hearing just like I want to say it was just last year, actually, one event that I went to had a talk from an NFL from a professional NFL guy who had a great career, and he mentioned in the talk how after winning after winning a Super Bowl, um, that night, like watching people celebrate, he thought about jumping out of the hotel room because he had achieved, like it was like achieved, and he had a moment of what else do I do now? Like that.
Yeah, there's some people who get so expertise oriented people especially, but probably others. There's this climb. You see this a lot with astronauts. If you ever dig into
Oh,
the lives of astronauts, I mean, once you've walked on the moon, where else is there? Because we ain't going to Mars yet. And there's a lot of them that
wow,
actually had a lot of problems with depression, alcoholism. Not all of them, but a great many of them for that very reason.
wow. Um, Something that I like that we're seeing more of is there do seem to be more, at least it's in the news more. I don't know which is true, but there we do seem we seem to see more professional athletes who are taking their career once they're done and parlaying it into more business success. So either they're getting more advice or they're getting smarter or whatever it is. Like I just saw yesterday, Shaq is the new president of basketball operations for Reebok or something, and Allen Iverson is his VP. Like these are guys that haven't played in 15, 20 years.
Well,
That's
yeah, and I mean, Shaq owns everything at this point. Like, if I open up the
yeah,
newspaper and say, "Oh, Shaq bought Walmart," I'd be like, "Yeah, that's what I expected now."
exactly. So like to see that, like to see people being able to do that, and I said like be like, okay, my playing days are over, but yeah, I'm going to take all the good that came from it, goodwill, stuff like that, or obstacles I overcame. Like Shaq's a goodwill guy. Like he's almost always, seems to be caught doing stuff for people, whatever it is. Like he's a big charity guy. I don't know nearly as much about Allen Iverson, for example, but my impression of Allen Iverson is he's more of a came from like the rough background guy. I could be totally wrong on that, by the way, but that's what I think of it. I don't know without knowing their background. But in both
Yeah, I could see those being true. I could see Shaq being an accolades guy because he was always kind of doing a little bit of funny stuff. He's
yeah,
always kind of like being funny in the commercials. So I mean, he could be a change
yeah.
guy, an
So
accolades guy,
yeah, so
expertise
to
guy. I mean,
see
I don't know.
people gain that success afterwards, and one more random example of that, and then we're done. is 'Cause I feel like a lot of people don't know this story. One of my favorite stories of this that was definitely not accolades driven is Randy Johnson, the Major League Baseball pitcher. If you remember him,
Okay.
yeah, but I mean, he's one of the greatest pitchers of all time. Super, super. I mean, you couldn't miss him. He's like 6'10", threw 100 miles an hour, and so he's the guy. He's the pitcher who also became famous at one point because a bird flew a suicide mission into one of his pitches.
Oh, where it exploded in a puff of feathers. Yes.
Exactly.
Who hasn't seen that clip?
So yes,
Jeez.
absolutely crazy. So his career is over. So he is a professional photographer now. So, super chill, like introvert style profession. And in most cases, you go there, you're quiet, you're taking pictures, sometimes sports, sometimes other stuff. His logo is an upside down bird with feathers around it. Like it's, it's like it's listen, just in terms of I said, like this guy was literally one of the best, and he's overdoing professional photography now and like living his best life. So just one of my favorite examples there of a guy who finished being a professional. Like he was a baseball player for till his early 40s. That has a lot of identity in your mind. So to be able to move past that, change your definition of success, and parlay it into something else, I always like love those stories and try to learn what I can from them.
Well, let me tell a story because it goes into how I want to recap too. Because if we're talking about reorienting and just knowing what you're chasing and then chasing it as effectively as you can, um, I brought up the idea of people who are sometimes like socially anxious and but still maybe they're accolades oriented, and that can be a challenge if their success is based on that. One of my very favorite comedians who sadly passed long before his time should have been up was a guy named Mitch Hedberg. And if you ever watched him on stage, he actually was a very socially anxious person. He wouldn't look at the audience. He'd like keep his head down and his hair would kind of like cover his face. And he would talk into his microphone, almost never looking at the audience. But as a person who figured out how to if we pretend he was accolades oriented, I really don't know. But if we pretend he was maybe accolades oriented, he still figured out how to chase the thing, even though he couldn't really make eye contact with anybody. And I mean, he was hilarious, just absolutely hysterical comedian. But if we assume we might have guessed right, maybe he's accolades oriented. He understood how to chase the thing even if some of the details were imperfect. So if we summarize this, the thing I hope people would be able to do is get an awareness of what your orientation to success is and what your really deep down at heart definition of it is, and then effectively chase that without getting too caught up into the details. So instead of making perfect details about how that should look, just continuing to chase the expertise or the security or the accolades or whatever uh, as effectively as you can, and keep getting more of the thing that makes you feel successful. That to my mind would be the way to get out of the overly rigid definitions of success and get into something that is far and away more effective, I think.
Yes, awesome. Awesome stuff, man. I feel like we covered a lot of good ground today for people on this topic. So, any other closing thoughts, or was that the
No,
summary?
I think that's about as much summary as it needs.
Awesome. Well, again, everybody, thanks for joining us today. Again, share, like this. Find somebody somebody else who could really benefit from this. I really appreciate it if you get this information to them. Really, just trying to help everybody live a little bit better lives. And again, you can always find us in the podcast world, specifically through Apple Podcasts and Spotify Podcasts. Asymmetric Habits. Again, put episodes on every Wednesday. If we just did a new one like this, we try to get this one up that next week. And then we have so many archived episodes from previous broadcasts that we've been putting those up as well. So information new and old on Asymmetric Habits. So, all right, everybody have a great rest of the day. Jonathan, my man, I'll catch you later.
We'll see y'all.